Hey everyone! Today we're breaking down the legendary first game of the 1972 World Chess Championship, Boris Spassky versus Robert Fischer, played in Reykjavik. Before we get started, make sure to subscribe and leave a like. It really helps the channel grow. In this game, Boris Spassky had the white pieces and started off with the queen's pawn. Fischer develops his knight and white takes control of the center. Robert opens the diagonal for his dark-squared bishop, and after knight f3, he plants a pawn in the center of the board. Spassky finishes developing his knights, and black pins one of them. This is the Rogozin defense. With this setup, black strengthens control over the central e4 square. It's known that in this position, a good continuation for white is to exchange on d5, followed by bishop g5. But the world champion prefers, by slightly changing the move order, to steer the game toward one of the solid and well-studied lines of the Nimzo-Indian defense, as noted by Mikhail Butvinik in his commentary.
Alright, so Fischer castles his king to safety, Spassky also prepares the castle, black creates pawn tension in the center of the board, and after castling increases pressure on the d4 pawn. Spassky forces the bishop to decide its position, and here the strongest move would be to exchange on c3, followed by a strike on c4, and the move queen c7, leading to a complex position with mutual chances. But Robert James Fischer declines this exchange and instead plays bishop a5, avoiding giving his opponent the bishop pair. Spassky had a chance to fight for an advantage by exchanging on d5, then striking on c5, threatening to push b4 and making it difficult for black to defend his extra pawn. In that case, black would likely have to trade on c3, and white would indeed gain the two-bishop advantage mentioned earlier. In our game, however, Spassky avoids that plan and plays knight e2, keeping his pawn structure solid. Fischer captures on c4, then increases pressure on white's central pawn. Spassky strikes back with c5, and in the meantime, Fischer trades queens and wins back the pawn.
White attacks the opponent's dark-squared bishop, forcing it to retreat. Spassky then develops his dark-squared bishop onto the long diagonal. White keeps a small advantage thanks to his more active bishops. In response, Fischer employs Wilhelm Steinitz's maneuver, planning to bring the rook to d8, retreat the bishop to e8, connect the rooks, and fight for control of the open file. White's last real chance to fight for an opening edge was the g4 push, grabbing space on the king side. Capturing that pawn isn't possible because the bishop would hang. But instead of that, Spassky goes for the more standard move rook c1. Black completes his maneuver while white centralizes his knight. Any exchanges here would only help black, who still lacks space. After the exchange, new squares opened up for the white bishop.
Fischer attacked the rook. White blocks with his bishop, and exchanges begin. Pieces come off the board, ending with rook c8. Thus, even with a temporary advantage from his more active bishops, Spassky played the opening without enough energy, allowing Fischer's careful and precise play to completely equalize the position. Now that we've entered the endgame, Spassky brings his king to the center. Black's attempt to invade the second rank leads nowhere, since white can trade on f6 and break through to the 7th rank, starting the attack on the queenside pawns. Meanwhile, black's 8th rank remains weak. So, in the game, the future 11th world champion also moves his king toward the center. After king e2, he activates his knight. White offers a rook trade, and after the exchange, black places a pawn on f6. Spassky attacks pawn, but pushing it forward would lose to a knight fork on c6, so Fischer calmly defends by repositioning his knight to d6. White continues by activating his king, preparing for the final stage of the endgame. Black threatens to ruin white's pawn structure, so Spassky repositions his knight to c4 and Fischer defends the attacked piece. White trades on d6 and Spassky seizes space on the queenside, placing his pawns on squares opposite in color to bishop, the classic José Raúl Capablanca rule. Black could have played almost any move without risking deterioration, but Fischer was probably unnerved by Spassky's obvious push for simplification. A draw by attrition was looming, and Fischer, who hated draws, decided to jolt the position with a lightning strike bishop h2.
In reply, Spassky plays g3 and mentally asks the obvious question, how exactly are you going to save that bishop, buddy? But the computer shows that the position is completely equal. Neither side has any real advantage here. Fischer urgently throws a queenside pawn to help his long-nosed friend. Spassky drags his king to e2 and then to h4, king f3. It turns out black's pawn push a3 doesn't work because white attacks the pawn. On the counterattack, bishop f2, and after capturing the pawn, the quiet move bishop d2 limits the mobility of black's dark-squared bishop. White wins a piece. Fischer apparently miscalculated the line after the final bishop d2, and the calculation was fairly simple, wrote Boris Spassky's coach Igor Bondarevsky in the commentary. But as we can see on the left, the computer doesn't think Fischer miscalculated at all.
Fischer declines to push h3, choosing king e7 instead. Spassky attacks the bishop. Black trades on g3 and is forced to give up a piece. Thanks to that kamikaze bishop, white now has a bishop for 2 pawns. Black pushes the king forward. Spassky defends the pawn on b5, while Fischer centralizes. Bishop a3, then king e4, targeting the pawn on e3. Spassky defends it with his bishop, and pushing b6 is impossible because of the tactical shot bishop b6. If black captures, white creates a passed pawn. Either the a pawn runs to promotion, or, after taking on a5, the b pawn becomes unstoppable. So in the game, the American grandmaster advances his attacked pawn instead. Spassky locks it down on b7. Then comes f5, and white plays king h4, aiming to sneak to g5. The pawns are exchanged, which is fine for black. Every trade brings him closer to a draw. But come on, who's going to allow that?
Spassky takes on f4 and plays king h5. In my opinion, Fischer should have resigned right after that move. Dragging the game all the way to move 56, as Botvinnik later wrote, showed that Fischer just couldn't control his nerves. King f5, blocking the white king from g6, but in reality, black is in Zugzwang. Spassky's precise bishop maneuvers stretch the defense so much that black's king can't protect both pawns at once. After bishop g5, black plays e4. Then bishop e3, and we see the problem. If the black king guards e4, the white king invades toward g7. So Fischer plays king f6, but Spassky marches his king toward the e4 pawn. After king e5, the white king gradually shoulders the black one away. Fischer makes a desperate attempt. He tries to fix the pawn on a4, grab it with his king, and push his own pawn down the a-file. But it just doesn't work. Spassky keeps squeezing with the power of Zugzwang.
Having no useful moves left, Fischer sacrifices a pawn with g5. After white takes, comes king c4. Spassky continues his march. His king heads for the e4 pawn. After king b4, he captures. Black takes on a4, and then white plays king d5. There's no way to stop his king from breaching b7, and as we know, that bishop can always be traded for the last pawn on the a-file. Fischer tries king b5, but after king d6, he resigns. White attacks the pawn on b7, and the black king can no longer defend everything. Zugzwang again seals the deal. White's bishop moves to d4, and sooner or later, the pawn will fall. Spassky's precision is absolute. The legend Fischer finally has to admit defeat.
And that's how Spassky slowly squeezed out one of the greatest players in history. A true masterclass in patience and precision. If you enjoyed this breakdown, hit that like button, drop a comment about your favorite moment, and subscribe so you don't miss the next legendary chess battle.